Hello, everybody, and welcome to this evening's United Europe panel discussion on EU, US, Russia security and energy security policy and the current situation. We have four guests on our panel tonight. I'll introduce them briefly, and they will then give a little bit more about their own background themselves when they give their opening statements. We have Professor James D. Bindernagel. He's the Botschafter at the Center for Advanced Security Strategy and Integration Studies, also known as CASIS. We have Professor Kasia Pizarska, who is the co-chair of the Warsaw Security Forum and chairman of the council, the Kazimir Pulaski Foundation. We also have Professor Dr. Friedrich Pflüger from CASIS and University of Bonn and a managing partner in Bingmann Pflüger International GmbH. And finally, to give the business side of the discussion, we have Mr. Michael Harms, who is the Executive Director of the German Eastern Association. So welcome to all of our guests. The subject of our discussion this evening is related to the security of Eastern Europe and whether it is under threat due to current political instability in Russia. We've seen the recent build-up of troops on the Russian border with the Ukraine, and how should the European Union and react, and where does the security of energy fit into all of this? The Nord Stream 2 pipeline project is almost complete. The last report I read was that approximately 128 kilometers of pipeline left to complete on 2 strands. Do we have to accept the reality of that, or that it will be completed? And how can we ensure the question of energy security for all of Eastern Europe and prevent the supply of the gas becoming a weapon in the whole security policy situation? On the other hand, we have the pressure of climate change resulting in calls for evolution or change of the Energy Charter Treaty and for a renegotiation of that. How does that fit into the knotted problem of energy policy in Europe? And should we take a more holistic view to the whole situation, bearing in mind the impact it has on the relationship between the EU, Russia and the USA? I would first turn to Professor Bindernagel. If you could give a short outline of your own background on the issue and an opening statement.
So thank you, James, and thank you for organizing this important and timely topic about US-EU-Russia relations and the new Biden administration and an old issue of Russian gas to Europe. Let me just say that I was a career Foreign Service officer. I was acting ambassador in Germany in 1996-97. and ambassador for Holocaust issues, that is for forced and slave labor for the US government, before going on to Chicago. And then for the last 7 years, I founded the Henry Kissinger Professorship here at the University of Bonn for security issues. And I'm delighted to be here with you all today to talk about Nord Stream. And let me just kind of give some context to Nord Stream. The debate in Germany is absolutely fascinating because you have many facets of this question of the Nord Stream pipeline. Chancellor Merkel has called it a commercial project. Armin Laschet, the presumed candidate for the CDU, states that energy policy is as important subject as we have in common, and it can certainly be thrashed out with the Biden administration. The Green leader, co-leader, if I may say so, Annalena Baerbock, has said that Nord Stream 2 is causing grave geopolitical problems and contradicts European climate targets. Of course, the perspective from Ukraine, if I may preempt a little bit my fellow panelists here, the foreign minister of Ukraine and the Polish foreign minister have appealed to President Biden to prevent its completion, calling it a divisive and dangerous project. The Baltic states in Central Europe and the European states and the Balkan countries see it as a weapon against their interests in Putin's hands and have made an effort to counter Russian influence with the 3 Seas initiatives. And recently, President Biden has called Nord Stream 2 as a bad deal for Europe. So you can see that there are many facets to this, not just the question of energy, but also that of Ukraine and peace and stability in Central Europe and climate, as you mentioned, as well as what I would consider the most important question for this discussion, and that's the role of Germany. The role of Germany in Europe, the role of Germany in the transatlantic relationship, the role of Germany with the Russians. If I may say so, there are lots of discussions about whether the pipeline will be finished. As I was just saying to our co-panelist here, Michael Harms, I started this discussion in 1981 with Ronald Reagan as a Foreign Service Officer when the Yamal pipeline was considered, sanctions were issued, the pipeline was completed, and we went on to discuss relationship with Russia throughout the 1980s, leading to 1989 and the peaceful revolution. I would like to say that even if the pipeline is finished, there are questions that need to be answered, and we will, I'm sure, talk about them this evening. And I'd like to leave one idea on the table to begin our discussion, and that is, I think the way to deal with this issue is one of diplomacy, and diplomacy in the sense that the United States and Europe should have a working group on transatlantic coordination, aligning their interests and creating a common European and American policies towards Russia, led by the Europeans, or at least initiated by the Germans, and could go a long way to demonstrating the role of Germany, its responsibility, European self-reliance, and equitable burden sharing as we go into these issues. So without going a long time, those are the kinds of issues that I would like to say. I would love to know that we can resolve the energy issues, but the energy issues aren't the only ones. So thank you very much for the opportunity to open the discussion, and I look forward to our discussion tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Bindernagel, and I'm sure we'll certainly come back to some of those topics, particularly the situation in Germany, given it's an election year. I will turn shortly to Professor Pisarska, just to let our audience know that depending on towards an opportunity for you to pose questions to our panelists. So if you'd like to do so, please just write them in the text function to me directly or to the audience generally. All the better if you do to the audience generally, so we have a more interaction, given that we're struggling with the Zoom technology and trying to make the most of our relationship. Professor Pisarska, please take the floor.
Thank you very much, James. Welcome. Thank you for the invitation. It's very nice to be here. It's great to see a lot of good friends in the audience. I'm looking forward to hearing from the audience as well, because as you said, this is a discussion. And I think it's an extremely timely discussion as Russian forces are amassing on the Ukrainian border. And we once again see not only an escalation, but a potential invasion of Russia into Ukraine. I think we have to look at the global picture of how Europe has been dealing with Russia, what has been attained over the years, and what, most importantly, what do we do next? And in this context, of course, the Nord Stream 2 pipeline is discussion that is almost, the pipeline is almost complete, but there's still many hurdles to the certification of that pipeline. What do we do with Nord Stream 2? Also in the context of incoming US sanctions, more sanctions to come is very important. And I would like to bring here first and foremost a point of view on Nord Stream from Poland and from Ukraine. I think both countries have shared the same assessment of the danger of this pipeline since way back in 2014 to 2015. These concerns have been repeated many times, and these concerns are threefold. First and foremost, Nord Stream pipeline is a political, not a commercial project. The Russian Federation over the years has shown very clearly it uses energy policy as a hybrid warfare instrument against Ukraine, as during the 2006, 2007, 2009 Ukrainian-Russian gas wars, but most importantly, as a hybrid warfare instrument against the European Union and against the West. Gazprom on the single market, on the internal market, has again and again abused its competitive advantage, its monopolistic position by, for example, blocking the ability for Europe to interconnect cost through deals that did not allow us to share energy. It has imposed over and over higher prices on those who have worse relations with Russia and much better prices with those who were more willing to cooperate with Russia. But most importantly, it has shown that it is able and willing to actually sacrifice commercial interest when it comes to higher political interest. So that's one point we have to remember when we talk about Nord Stream. Second, Nord Stream has been going again and again against the EU energy policy as we have set it since 2008. And Germany, I want to remind you, was one of the key proponents of the energy policy, the EU energy policy that we currently share. This policy said very clearly, we need to diversify our energy supplies and walk away from our high dependence on gas from Russia. And that there was agreement inside of the Council of the EU, there was agreement among the leaders that this should be priority. We took a number of steps, including the third energy package, including the unbundling principle. All these have been applied to Nord Stream over the years. But having Nord Stream 2 completed, of course, only furthers our dependence on Russia and again goes against the EU strategy that we've established together as member states. And last, but definitely not least, we need to remember what is the real purpose of establishing a second Nord Stream pipeline. We have one pipeline already functional for many years. It brings the necessary supplies to Germany. So the big question is, why do we need the second one? And the second one is a pipeline that is directed to Ukraine in order to simply and meaningfully cut Ukraine out of the gas market. So basically not only takes away, the Nord Stream 2 not only takes away the transit fees that Ukraine might receive or is receiving from Russia, but significantly hampers Ukrainians' independence in the gas transit system. And we should remember that the Nord Stream 2 does not bring any meaningful additional capacity in gas for Western Europe because it simply redirects the flow that was going from Ukraine. So what we see is that Ukraine and Central Europe is cut out of direct gas supplies, and these gas supplies go for Nord Stream 2, will be going for Nord Stream 2 and through Germany. So for these reasons, there is a very strong opposition in Central Europe and in Ukraine in particular. And there is a push also today from the US Congress and from the Biden administration to stop the pipeline development. And if not stop it, then at least find some kind of a mechanism that would assure first and foremost, Ukrainian interest. And I think this is particularly important when we observe today's military situation on the border of Ukraine, because many say, okay, if we will have Nord Stream 2, we will also be able to say to Russia, well, you know, stop your behaviors in Ukraine. But we see that Russia is not deterred. Yes, and one of the few deterrents that is still there is that Ukraine can cut the gas going into Europe. So also taking away the revenues from Ukraine, weakening the situation of Ukraine when it is already in a dramatical situation against a huge force that Russia represents, both militarily, politically, and economically, is completely irresponsible. And we need to see the Nord Stream pipeline for what it is, merely a Russian political project, a geopolitical project, and definitely not a commercial project that some would like to see. I'll stop here because I'll know that there will be many questions from the audience and discussions, and I'm looking forward to this very much. Thank you, James.
Thank you, Kasia. Thank you, Professor Paczka. Professor Pflüger, would you like to jump in and add your statement to the mix before we move to Mr. Harms? You need to unmute, Mr. Pflüger.
You're muted.
Sure. Sorry. Thank you, first of all, for having me in this discussion. I disagree with Katarzyna. I would have agreed to a large extent in 2009, after the Russian-Ukrainian gas crisis. But since then, the world has changed. Russia is not anymore able to put pressure, neither on Central and Eastern Europe nor on Western Europe, because we have reacted forcefully as the EU. We have built 30 LNG terminals around Europe. By the way, one in Poland, one in Lithuania. And the mere fact that they have been inaugurated led to the situation that Gazprom had to go down with its prices. We have a system of interconnectors today in place, not only east-west flow, also north-south flow. We have reverse flow of gas. We can sell the gas freely in Europe. It's a liberalized gas market. It's a buyer's market. There is enough gas around and there is competition. So even if Russia would like to put pressure via gas, it is absolutely unable to do so because we have alternatives. We have rebuilt our storage facilities. And since this year, we have the Trans-Adriatic pipeline, which brings 10 billion cubic meters of gas from the Caspian Sea, non-Russian gas to Europe. And we have LNG growing capacities. So the picture that you have in mind, in my point of view, is the picture of 2009. Today, it is a free, liberalized market, and that brought Angela Merkel to the judgment to say it is a commercial project, not because she's naive and doesn't see geopolitical connotations with that, but because it is a project which has all the permissions. And it is not only a Gazprom and a Russian project. There are 5 huge global players from Europe, OMV Austria, ENGIE France, from Germany, Wintershall, as you know, and Uniper, Shell. You think they are naive, useful idiots of the Kremlin? No, they have commercial interests. So it is a commercial project in my point of view. Of course, it has geopolitical implications, but therefore we did all this upgrading of the infrastructure in Central and Eastern Germany. We built with, by the way, are in the process to build the Baltic pipeline between Poland, Norway, and Denmark, by the way, with taxpayers' monies. We brought about the agreement with Ukraine and Russia as EU. We brought it about that the transit agreement continues, so they get their transit fees, although it is not really commercially necessary. And you know that the pipeline hasn't been modernized for years and years. It's from the climate point of view and from the commercial point of view, not the best option that we have. So, and then of course I understand that the Central and Eastern Europeans have their fears and their problems with Russia and perhaps also with Germany, if you look to history. That is very understandable. Therefore, I was someone having been 20 years in parliament who was one of the strongest proponents of NATO enlargement. And I believe NATO should be strong. But we Germans have another experience with energy and with gas. Our experience was that in the times of the Cold War, when there were a lot of tensions, much worse than today, Afghanistan, Angola, everywhere in the world, the Soviet Union tried to put forward its policies. And in that period, the gas pipeline, the pipes and gas deal between Germany and Russia was a focus point of stability and of peace. We have had with Russia a reliable energy partner. And we don't want to put more oil in the fire of East-West relations by even escalating the situation right now. We want to preserve this, of course, not to the extent of our friends and partners in Central and Eastern Europe, but therefore we have all these guarantees that we have built for in the last years. But my main point is, even if one disagrees with us, even if and that's always legitimate to have another opinion, of course. What is not possible in the American-European relationship are transnational sanctions. The EU Commission and the President of the EU Commission, Mrs. von der Leyen, has made absolutely crystal clear that this is against the law. We will not bend to that. And these sanctions, are against everything we had up to now in the transatlantic relationship. J.D. Bindenagel just mentioned the Reagan administration. Yes, we also had a lot of arguments with Reagan, not only on the pipeline issue, on SDI, on many other problems. But we always found a solution. And we always said, well, we trust each other, we are partners. And we do not begin to put sanctions on each other. Imagine we would start to sanction the United States for special behavior. That's not the way how we act in an alliance of friends and partners. And I would ask our friends in Poland and Ukraine and in the US, and I'm seeing a lot of voices in the US now. JD is one of them. The Atlantic Council, where I'm a senior fellow of Richard Morningstar and Daniel Fried, really not doves in the Russian-American relationship. They came out and said, no sanctions. Let's find a diplomatic solution, which includes securities for Ukraine. That is the way to come out, and not to put even more oil in the fire. I'm very grateful. I'm not a social democrat. I've been 20 years a CDU MP, but Heiko Maas today, the foreign minister of Germany, said, well, that would escalate the situation. Is it not time that we begin to do what Reagan did after the Cold War was very tough, that he sat down with Mr. Gorbachev in Geneva and in Reykjavik, and that they made some red lines, that they did a balance of interests, and that they begin to trust each other again. That is needed right now. And I'm very grateful that Mr. Biden offered this to Mr. Putin, and I hope that this will work. But to believe you can push Russia and push so much pressure on it that it changes its behavior is very naive, it's very unhistoric. It will lead to the opposite, to further escalation. So let's be strong with our military, but look for fields of cooperation. There is energy, a very important one. And let's look for a diplomatic solution. We have so much in common, so many possibilities in the field of hydrogen and green energies where we should work together, that we now should get out this elephant out of the room. Thanks.
Can I respond?
Just one moment, Professor Pisarska. We could let Mr. Harms give his opening statement and view, and then we can return to you to respond to the call for harmony and so on. Professor Michael Harms, please.
Thank you, James. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for the invitation. I must admit that I feel a kind of Nord Stream 2 fatigue over the last months and weeks, because we have discussed it so intensively. But our dialogue today also shows that the discussion is still not only very important, but absolutely necessary. So with all due respect to President Biden, I must say that we still, as German business, or the majority of German business, we still consider Nord Stream 2 to be a good deal for Europe. And let me give you maybe three arguments or three counter arguments to the opponents of Nord Stream 2. So first of all, we are quite often asked by the opponents of Nord Stream 2. Why should we pay for billions of euros for a project which nobody needs? And here I think the answer can be twofold. So first is more physical one. We need Nord Stream 2 to compensate the losses we will have because our sources in the gas sources in Northern Sea will decrease over the next years. And this is very important because we need, as we all know, natural gas as a bridge technology. And as we have seen last winter, where we had not enough pipeline gas, LNG was very expensive, and the renewables couldn't supply enough. So we had to switch on our coal-fired power plants, which is not good for energy transition. So alternative to pipeline gas is coal, and we definitely do not want it. But it's more the energy-driven argument. The other argument is, who is we? Yeah? Why we all always refer to we? Not Germany, neither the European Union is buying gas. Private companies, commercial companies within a strictly regulated and liberalized market, Friedbert Plüger just perfectly explained that, are buying gas. And this is a perfect system. We have been very successful over the last years with such a system, and we should stick to it. So therefore, there is no one single cent of European taxpayers in that project. And let it be the commercial risk of the companies, of the global energy companies. So therefore, this argument, I think, is not valid. The second argument is that is always mentioned that we are dependent on Russian gas. And again, I refer to Professor Flüger, who perfectly gave the whole picture. I think we are not only not dependent, but it is an interdependence. So Russia is much more dependent on the revenues from their gas supply as we are from the Russian imports, because we have a lot of sources. We are so-called swing importers, so we can import gas from many sources. Russia sells its gas through the pipeline system to Europe, and it is again very much dependent on these incomes. And here also I agree with Friedbert Flüger. So the Russians have never used this as a geopolitical weapon in 50 years. But let's give maybe an example from the recent past. So Russia had a lot of conflicts, even close to a military conflict, for example, with Turkey. According to that logic, Russia or Putin should have immediately stopped the gas supply to Turkey via Turkstream. But he did not do so, and for good reasons, because if he does that once, nobody will buy gas from Russia, because you are not a reliable partner anymore. Putin stopped flights from Turkey. He stopped the import of Turkish vegetables, which is also not nice, but he didn't use gas. And I think we should also have that in mind. The third argument is, and Katarzyna just also mentioned it, that Nord Stream 2 is a project for circumventing Ukraine. This is, I think, a valid and serious argument, and we should thoroughly consider that, and we do so as German business. But here I must say it was the German government, the federal government, who invested not only a lot of political capital, a lot of efforts to prolong the transit agreement with Ukraine until 2024. And Mrs. Merkel and Minister Altmaier and many other German politicians always said that energy security of Ukraine is key, and we as German business fully agree with that. It's very important because, again, Ukraine is losing then the income from the transit agreement. It can become more vulnerable to Russian aggression, which is true. But we do a lot to secure the energy supply of Ukraine, not only via the the imports from the West. So Ukraine is not importing from Russia anymore. It's all done through the reverse flows and interconnectors, which have been mentioned. But Germany also concluded, the federal government, an energy partnership with Ukraine last year. So we explicitly included Ukraine, not Russia, in the hydrogen strategy of the federal government. German companies are investing a lot in the renewable developments in Ukraine. We appointed a special envoy from the federal government, the former Prime Minister Saxony, Mr. Tillich, for the transition of the coal region. So are really doing a lot. So we support the integration of the energy grid, the system of Ukraine, to the European system, which is also a very important step. So we are really, again, investing a lot of money and efforts in the energy security of Ukraine. And but I think we can do both. We can construct and use Nord Stream 2. We can fight for the transition, for the prolonging of the gas transit to Ukraine, and investing also in the energy security of Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Harms. Professor Pizarro, two strong proponents against your point of view and in favor of Nord Stream 2. Please take the floor, and we probably want to bear in mind that there's not just Nord Stream 2, there's a wider context, particularly with what's happening in Donbass. So we might want to move on to that
as well. Yeah, absolutely. So I'll be very short in kind of a response. First of all, the integrated EU energy market that we're trying to attain, and we've been working for, is a result, among others, of Poland, Lithuania, and other countries from this region going back and forth to the Commission and pointing out to the abuse of the monopolistic position of Gazprom in this internal market. So yes, since 2009, we have made a number of steps to get away from this Russian grip, especially our countries, which have and still are so heavily dependent on Russian gas because of historical, geographical, and other reasons. But that integrated energy market would not be possible if it was not for the push of the Central Europeans. So I think that should be taken into account. Second thing, and most importantly, we have now alternatives. These alternatives, you are right, Poland built an LNG terminal. We are investing in a number of different alternatives. I would hope it would not be coal. I'm a very big, of course, critic of reliance on coal, but we are looking as Europe as a whole for a number of different tools. However, Ukraine has no alternative. And when I spoke in my intervention, I spoke and thought mainly about Ukraine. Without help, Ukraine has no alternative to Russian gas. And we know it, yes? Whether we like it or not, it is dependent on Russia.
It doesn't take any. It doesn't take any Russian gas. Yes, but it goes through the flows,
but the transit fees, yes? The transit fees are key also for the Ukrainian budget. And the whole idea, as I said, and Mr. Harms also said, was to circumvent Ukraine as a market, and Nord Stream significantly weakens Ukraine's situation. And number three, Russia has used energy as a weapon. We had a gas war between Ukraine and Russia in 2005, in 2006, and in 2009. And from these gas wars, the European Commission brought its lessons that were then used to integrate the EU market.
That's what I said.
But that was Mr. Harms who said there was never a use of gas as a hybrid weapon. Well, that's not true. Why didn't it cut Turkey off? Because Russia cannot afford cutting Turkey off. It sees Turkey as a prospective market, but also a way into Europe. So it cannot afford alienating Turkey in this energy field, just like it cannot cut right now China, which is a future investment, yes, which is a future market. And my last point here would be, I'm also, just like you, not, and I'm just like Dan Fried, I'm also not a big fan of US sanctions. I think, first of all, allies should not sanction each other. It's a way to nowhere. And if we begin sanctioning, you know, the internal market by American government, it leads basically nowhere. But it doesn't mean that we should not sit down together and see how, in what way we could find options that would help Ukraine in the case of the construction of Nord Stream, the completion of Nord Stream, the certification of Nord Stream, that would kind of help Ukraine in its current situation. There's a number of ideas floating around there. There's a moratorium on launching, for example, Nord Stream. Some are talking about this idea. Some are talking about creation of guarantees to maintain the limited transit of Russian gas for Ukraine, or a snapback mechanism. I haven't looked closely at these proposals. Some of them are dependent on Russia, so basically not realistic. Some of them actually will demand goodwill from Germany and an agreement overall, but these discussions, I think, should be going on for us to understand the concerns of Ukraine, to understand the concerns of Central Europeans, but most importantly, to be able to react. And here I move away from Nord Stream and move to today's situation. Because when we say, and I cite, to put more oil to fire, we are already today in a potentially escalating situation, which is escalating with no fault of Ukraine, and is escalating with no fault of Central Europe, and I think no fault of Germany. The amassing of Russian forces, the complexity of those maneuvers, these forces were supposed to be pulled out of the borders after the maneuvers, I think on March 24th. Today is April 15th, and what we're seeing is actually growing presence, showing a clear intent on invasion. Of course, whether Russia will invade or not is a completely different question. I personally do not believe it, but what they are doing is they're putting political pressure on us in a number of different, for a number of different reasons. And now I would be interested to know, how can we continue saying, you know, we put oil onto the fire, we provoke Russia, we are the ones to take responsibility for relations with Russia, when you have a country that clearly really doesn't care. It does whatever it wants, and it does whatever it thinks is right at that very moment, even if it's at the breach of basic principles of international order, such as territorial sovereignty of its neighbor. It's unthinkable what has happened since 2014 with the annexation of Crimea. Things we thought were absolutely unthinkable. So how far can we go in an appeasement policy with Russia? That is my question. We in Poland had very bad historical experience with appeasement policy. I can tell you it does not work. It does not work for the weaker players. And the weaker players today is not Germany. Germany is the tough, strong player. The weak player is Ukraine. And usually the weaker players are those who have to sacrifice their sovereignty and their independence so that we find an appeasement with a clear aggressor. That's all on my side.
Thank you, Professor Bizarka. I know that Professor Pfluger wants to jump right in there and counter that discussion. But before it goes into a sort of a binary debate, maybe if I could turn to Professor Bindernagel, who's sort of a more nuanced overall view on the situation and some possible solutions to the Nord Stream 2 thing, quite apart from the security situation in Ukraine.
So,
Professor Bindernagel.
I want to come back to the point. What we've seen in this discussion so far is clear that this project, this Nord Stream 2 project, is no longer a politically relevant question. It's no longer, as a private project, is no longer politically relevant. It's much more relevant to a whole range of issues. And the things that Friedrich Pfluger suggested, that the Americans are doing extraterritorial sanctions against allies and companies, is actually a very, very raw period. And it also shows that we have to find a solution. As Friedberg also suggested, a diplomatic solution, as Reagan did, as Biden has has outlined, beginning. He's talked about, he's invited Putin for a summit. What is the content? What do we need to do to that? It's not good enough, I don't think. Professor Katarina, it's fine to raise these questions, but I think we also, at least as a diplomat, you can't just bring a problem without at least a proposal for a solution. And we've got a solution on the table. The solution on the table requires Germany to take the initiative. We know the history. You can't let history block the future. You have to go say, all right, we understand the history. Because of the history, you can do what Fischer did in 1999 in Kosovo, switched Nie wieder Krieg von deutscher Boden to Nie wieder Auschwitz. You can change history. And what we need to do right now is for Germany to say, okay, we can't just have this foreign minister get up and contradict what the chancellor says. That doesn't work. You need a German policy that's very straightforward. And that policy is very simple. Take all of these issues. We have some that align and some that don't align. Align those issues. And all we're asking for Putin to do is to adhere to agreements. We're not asking for a change in behavior. We're asking for him to stick with what he's agreed to, what Russia's agreed to. That's all that is where the goal here. But you can't do that if we're only talking about how awful the American sanctions are, how awful the Russians were in 2005, 6, and 9. And this project is a private project. These are all distractions. And the result of that distraction is really, there are two things: disunity in Europe and disunity in the transatlantic relationship. That is, Putin wins in both cases and weakens us. We have to turn to ourselves. The Biden administration is actually looking for Germany to take the initiative to say what can be done, because as Katarina also pointed out, Germany is strong. It is the wealthiest, most secure country in Europe, and needs, and has said in 2014, shortly before the invasion of Ukraine, said would take on more international responsibility. It is now almost 7 years later. This is the opportunity that Germany can take to take an initiative, align interests, propose a dialogue with the United States. You can't obviously always be at the table in a bilateral summit, but you can also be very much part of what that summit's going to talk about and support it or not support it and change the policy. That's the diplomatic solution that we should be talking about, rather than complaining about each other and trying to defend it and keep it isolated or compartmentalize these issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Professor Bindernagel. I saw Professor Pflüger nodding his head there, so I'm not sure if you want to intervene, because Mr. Harms has his hand up here. So I'll just turn it to you, Harms.
Yeah, thank you very much. Maybe just two comments from my side. So I stick to my statement that Russia has never used it as a geopolitical weapon, because the price war with Ukraine, it was really at that time, first of all, it was not today's democratic Ukraine. It was a oligarchic controlled Ukraine with Mrs. Tymoshenko, Mr. Firtash, who was the chairman of a joint venture between Gazprom and Naftogaz, and they imported Russian gas. And the conflict was about the price. There were no political arguments and not any political ultimata from the Russian side. It was just a price war between two oligarchic groups, as I remember that. So, but maybe that's only a small comment. Maybe the most important thing is we are also not naive towards the Russian regime, and we do not support appeasement. And especially the German government was very clear in not only talking, but acting, as after the annexation of Crimea and the war in Eastern Ukraine, in imposing sanctions on Russia. Germany was I would say, the driving force behind these sanctions. But on the other hand, we shouldn't be so naive to consider not to do as a kind of Gordon knot, yeah. So we cut that and everything will be all right. This is naive. And here again, I would fully agree with Mr. Pflüger to put more and more and more pressure on Russia. It is not a pragmatic approach. It's a dead end. So we need Nord Stream 2 not only as a bridge technology in the energy aspect, but also as a bridge of interdependence. Interdependence is good. And I would here again mention one of the Mogherini principles, selective engagement. And the selective engagement with Russia in energy and climate issues, because, for example, Nord Stream 2 can be used in the future as transport also for hydrogen. This is one of the remaining issues we can discuss with Russia globally. So therefore, we need that as a key for stability. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Harms. We have about 15 minutes left on our allotted time. We may go if the discussion warrants it and everything, but it's about the stage of these types of debates that we turn to our audience to see if they would like to contribute. And I see that Elmar Brok has his hand raised. Mr. Brok, if you want to address our panel, please unmute and turn on your video. We can see you. Mr. Brok. I do see in our text as well, we have other questions that we'll try and address those as well. I'll call on you too, but if anyone in particular wants to address the panel, just use the hand up function. Mr. Brok, you have the floor.
Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. I have only a short remark because I became nervous, but Mr. Harms just at the end. That was, first of all, call it not with Timoshenko, the anti-democratic oligarchist government. The government, Yushchenko, Timoshenko, was the result of the Orange Revolution. And the gas policy was because it was Russia wanted to prevent then the Orange Revolution would win. And Russia has always used prices for political purposes. They asked for countries who did not behave in their sense, higher prices, much higher prices than from other customers. And therefore, this was a clear political battle. Please do not underestimate it. And I think what Ambassador Bindenagel said, it's an important point. First of all, we should avoid the split in the West. Germany is relatively alone in this situation. When I see the situation in the European Union and with the United States, and especially in the European Union, our neighbors in the East, and because of the historical responsibilities also toward these neighbors and all that other history. And we have to see, and this has to be seen in context. And I do not believe what Mr. Harms said, that we need it because of the lack of the northern gas. There are a lot of other possibilities to go for diversification, and we do not need to go over 50% of German consumption from Russia. I'm for Nord Stream 1. I am for buying gas from Russia, but Nord Stream 2 is not needed. It's a political instrument which makes economically in the long run no sense.
Well, can I? We don't hear you. We don't hear you.
Excuse me, Mr. Pfluger, if you want to take the floor.
Yeah, I would like to say a few things, because we have some points where we agree and we should look to them. First, I think is we all agree that sanctions is probably not the right way to deal among allies. Secondly, we agree that there are a lot of important issues next to Nord Stream, also in the field of energy. Renewables, hydrogen, there are hundreds of possibilities where we can enhance energy cooperation. If we look to a diplomatic solution, I could very well imagine that at the end we find a way to have an ongoing transit agreement with Ukraine. The present one is until 2024. We could prolong that for 5-6 years. That would be one of my suggestions. Although in the long run, it might not be very wise of Ukraine to, on the one hand, be very much against Russia, but make itself reliable on these transit fees. But for the time being, I understand that. And I think the Ukraine has to be an important part of that solution. Thirdly, we could find a European, Ukrainian, Russian way of modernizing the pipeline through Ukraine. We should build meters who really count how much gas is flowing from Russia to Ukraine, so that we in the future will not have these struggles about stealing gas or bringing gas away.
No, it's not true, you know, Friedbert.
Well, I'm just saying, I'm looking in the future, Elmar. So just to keep quiet. Fourthly, we agree, and I think Elmar is right here, that of course in the past, as long as Russia was a monopoly in Central and Eastern Europe, it could use gas prices as a political pressure. But therefore, the EU has done a lot of important steps, and I'm happy that Katarzyna agreed that many things has happened since 2009. By the way, I was active
because
with
we
this,
fought
Central,
for it very strongly, you know.
And you fought for it with
the
Central
fact
Europe.
that you pay much less
absolutely.
on the
and
same.
Katarzyna, I absolutely agree. I was very closely cooperating with Central Europe Energy Partners, with Lotos Group and many other companies in Central and Eastern Europe. And we together with the Atlantic Council, we developed a north-south concept, which made it possible to have interconnectors, reverse flow, and all these things. But you acknowledge that they have happened. So why don't we continue on that way and not use energy ourselves as a weapon? Let's learn from Ronald Reagan. He was tough on the one hand, but on the other hand, he tried to find a balance of interest. And the German attitude was always encouraging the United States to a good dialogue with Russia, because we have responsibilities, Elmar is absolutely right, towards Poland and others, but also to Russia. What has happened in Russia in World War II is so terrible and so cruel. And I don't want another war and another military confrontation with Russia. It is our lesson. Never again let Poland come between Russia and Germany. Therefore, we were in favor of NATO enlargement. And it is also our lesson that we will not have peace in Europe without finding an imbalance of interest with Russia.
But Friedbert, what did the Germans, Nazis to Poland, Ukraine, and the Baltic?
Elmar, it has always been the policy of one of your heroes, Helmut Kohl.
Yeah, just a moment, and Mr. Bruck, if you want to intervene, I'll come to you just now, but I think it's only fair to allow Professor Pizarska to address the raised by Professor Kruger.
Very quickly. So, gentlemen, okay, I think I agree here with Friedbert on a number of issues. On some we will disagree, but definitely we need to support Ukraine. But my question to you is very simple. What do we do today to help Ukraine with the current escalation? Because if you have a clear vision on how to conduct the policy with Russia, how not to put too much pressure, and that is supposed to bring solutions, then I would like to hear from you practical actions we should take in the next 24, 48 hours, 2 weeks to actually stop what's happening on the Ukrainian border. That's my question to you.
Yeah, sure.
If sanctions are not the way, if cutting Nord Stream 2 is not the way, if there's, you know, so tell me what you recommend we do.
Well, if you would take Nord Stream 2 and stop it now, I don't know how this should work legally. You would have to pay billions of euros to the companies to make up for their investments. But if you would do that, you would escalate the situation and you would do a lot of harm, in my political.
How much escalation can we have?
But I will tell you what I would do. I will tell you what I would do. I think that the telephone call between Mr. Biden and Mr. Putin is a very good sign. And I would give a message to Mr. Putin and tell him, stop this. We believe this is a terrible development. If you continue to engage in that, let us talk. I am willing to hear your positions. I have my positions. let us continue, let us do exactly what Reagan and Gorbachev did in 87 or 86. Let us meet with very few advisors for a long time, discuss, get to know each other, try to find areas where we agree in. And the first thing you have to do before we do this is stop further escalating the situation in Eastern Ukraine.
But we're not escalating. That's the best part. It's not us
escalating. You've both made the point there, and I think it's very, very excellently made, and it's really the key issue, I think, at this particular stage of the debate around energy security policy. Before I go to Mr. Bruck, if anybody in the audience wants to ask a question, you have 4 minutes. Just put your hand up. Of course, we have to consider the power of Mr. Putin to de-escalate, given that perhaps part of his activity or the activity of his troops on the border are inspired to distract from his own domestic political situation. But that's another issue. Mr. Bruck, you have your hand up. Please go ahead. Mr. Bruck, if you're there, you're not there yet.
Yeah,
we'll turn to.
Yeah, I'm here.
Please, here. Go ahead. Go ahead, Mr. Bruck.
Yeah, I have only to make one remark. Okay, I think it was just said the main purpose for bringing the gas through the Ukraine is that the Ukraine needs the money for the transfer. Is Europe or the companies or the United States, together the West, ready and able to compensate the Ukraine for that? That, I think, it's a decisive point. If I have understood Dan Fried rightly, he makes such proposals. And I believe here we have to see in the economic future of Ukraine, the goal for Russia is that the democratic, free, Western-orientated Ukraine becomes not successful, because a successful Ukraine of such a type is the biggest threat for Russia. That is the main battle which is going on at the moment. And the threat again now to the Donbass is, I think, also one of the instruments to make the positive development in Ukraine weaker. And this has to be understood, and we have to understand which role Nord Stream 2 in such a situation can play for that. If that can be compensated, then let's talk.
Let me just intervene for 1 second.
Go ahead, Professor.
One quick comment. What you want to do right now today is to stop arguing between Europeans and stop arguing between the Americans and the Europeans. And what Putin has heard from America is two things. One, an invitation for a summit, but he's also received today a whole range of sanctions and other actions. And what we have is a dissent in the German government, two different points of view, mixed messages. That will not help. That will not help Biden as he goes to try to talk to Putin. The same can be said for Nord Stream 2. He left out Nord Stream 2. That is a very good sign, because it offers the Europeans the opportunity to get a European position together so that there can be a single voice in dealing with Putin. Otherwise, he will divide and conquer. That's what he wants to do, and he's been very successful at it. We shouldn't let him do that.
Thank you, Professor Bindernagel. We're almost at the end here now. I don't see any other questions from the audience. I see a few things in the text of invited individuals to step forward and put their hand up, but they're not willing to do that. So if we could do a round robin, maybe to just close it off, if any of our four panelists would like to say something else. Otherwise, I shall nominate one. Professor Pisarska, if you want to have the closing statement.
Ladies first. I like that. That's fine. No, but very, very briefly, because we do have 1 minute. I think we are in a panel of United Europe, and I think that's one thing we can definitely agree upon. What Professor James, I'm sorry, what James said a moment ago. We need to speak one voice. I mean, the only way to face any global challenge that the West faces today, but especially Russia and the Putin regime, is to speak in one voice. But we also need to have very clear considerations when it comes to our Eastern neighbors. I will say this again, they are in a much more disadvantaged position than we, even in Poland, have been in the last 30 years. They are heavily dependent on Russia in terms of economy, energy, political influences, are under extreme pressure on the disinformation front, on the different influence front. So what they're going through, we only have bits and pieces of, yes, like electoral interference or propaganda or campaigns that reach us and still hurt us. They have to live with this on a daily basis. So I think it's also a priority that we take a stand, especially for those countries who want to become strong democracies and at the same time have to face a war with an enemy who's very clearly against democratization of the region. And if we don't support these countries, not only will we hurt them, but we will be hurting ourselves by providing an unstable, direct European neighborhood. And we need Ukraine to be a stable country. We need these countries to grow over time. And the relations that they have with Russia are doing simply the contrary. So we need to be there for those countries. That is my only point.
Absolutely.
Super, Professor Pisarska. We're out of time. However, I do have one member of this who wants to pose one question. It's Ms. Karina Matvienko. If you want to turn on your video so we can see you, and if you please ask one member of the panel to answer your question. I don't think we have time to hear every view, unfortunately. Go ahead, Karina. Unmute your microphone.
Thank you very much. Yes, I think I would like to just pose a question to Mr. Pflüger. Do you believe in the change of the Russian behavior with the EU when it comes to the resource dependency, and where should the change come from? From within, from the forces who advocate that the Russian market should be diversified, or from the side of the EU? And is it even possible? Thank you.
I'm sorry, I didn't get the question.
Yes, if the change in the Russian behavior should come, will it come from within the country, from the public forces who advocate for the change in the market diversification, or will it come rather from the side of the EU with the sanctions and with diplomatic pressure?
Well, okay. I don't think that you can ever put sanctions on a big superpower and that this superpower will react with changes of behavior. They have nuclear weapons. They believe that they are strong militarily, and they will not allow us to push them down. But that doesn't mean that we should not react with power. I'm in favor that Germany does more for its defense. I'm in favor, I have always been in favor of NATO engagement. It must be very clear to the Baltic states that we are behind them. So be strong on the one hand, but offer dialogue on the other hand. That is the solution that always has characterized the foreign policy of German governments. And I feel obliged in that line. Both will change behavior. But what we have to do also, what we have to see also is Mr. Putin doesn't trust us. It's not just we have our problems with him. He has problems with us. Who is there whom he can trust? Who in the Russian idea, NATO enlargement was something that they had not expected. They feel that Ukraine was an independent country, and now they see the West as more and more trying to integrate Ukraine. That might be right to do so, but it is a problem for the Russians. and we have to sit down together and united. I absolutely agree with Katarzyna and Elmar Brok and others. Find a united position, sit down with the Russians and tell them where the red lines, and perhaps neutrality of Ukraine in military terms, a guaranteed neutrality in military terms, no NATO enlargement to Ukraine, but integrate them in it more and more in EU structures. If we could do some arrangements like this, also on the global agenda, I think that the Russians will be happy with that because they have their internal problems. So let us be strong on the one hand, but not escalate, act rationally. And Mr. Biden's way, I trust very much in Mr. Biden, that he plays tough, has strong rhetoric, but on the other hand, he wants a solution with the Russians, because it's not smart also, given the Chinese challenge, to have two big enemies and do everything that these two enemies geopolitically do their own thing. So it's perhaps a little bit better to see whether we find our act with Russia.
Thank you very much. I think about wraps it up. It will continue, I guess, the debate on Twitter, and you can follow on of this debate on Twitter, on our Twitter feed, please. I do see that Professor Pisaska has her hand up. We're a bit over time, but and Professor Bindanaga. I tell you what, in the interview, Mr. Harms, Mr. Bindanaga, Ms. Pisaska, very, very shortly, 30 seconds each.
Yeah, so first, if there's any military neutrality of Ukraine, this can be done only if the Ukrainian people agree. I mean, we've been there, we've done that. We've been also part of the Yalta deal. We did not agree to be part of the communist Soviet sphere of influence, and we was forced to it. So if the Ukrainians agree not to join NATO, let it be. But if they say they want to, we cannot say no to them, because it's also a moral issue, as it was in the case of Yalta. So that is my point here.
Let me just say that I had the opportunity.
Go ahead.
Mr. Putin and I both served in East Germany in 1989 and came away with a different perspective. And I think it's important to know we came away with the idea, the end of history, that is, the freedom prevailed and Germany was united, Europe was united, and we were delighted. Mr. Putin, however, came away with the sense that what happened in 1989, 1990 was the greatest geopolitical catastrophe in the 20th century for Russia, and he's trying to make it back. You have to know that he's trying to recreate what he lost. We are trying to preserve what we won, freedom versus what he has as spheres of influence. That's the context for what we're talking about.
And Friedbert, we are in Poland in NATO, not because you wanted or somebody did not want. It's because we wanted to be, because we fought through it. We did a huge campaign in the Congress. We did a huge campaign in many places for many years for you to admit us there. It was our decision.
Indeed.
But I tell you, you had a lot of friends.
We had a lot of friends.
Europe, in
we had
Germany,
a lot of friends,
and
we're grateful to these friends.
And Volker Rühr and myself were one of those who very strongly supported this against a lot of opposition also.
Thank you.
So no, I don't say it to provoke a thank you. I just want to say we have always understood Polish fears of, when Russia and Germany got too close to each other, and that Poland belongs to the West, to EU, to NATO is very important. But we have also a responsibility vis-a-vis Russia and peace overall.
But what Volker Rühr said in 1992 applies today. He said in IISS speech, the Poles deserve the same security as Germany. And that's
Absolutely.
where we have this unity. Absolutely. That's the unity that we still need to not argue about. We need to build.
Absolutely.
I want to believe Ukraine also deserves that security.
That's a stage of the debate now where the COVID situation really spoils it on us, because I detect that if this was a normal in-person situation, we would have the means for
some vodka, yeah.
the means for convening us at the bar and continuing the discussion sort of on a different level and getting into some more of the intricacies of it. But unfortunately, that's not possible. However, I do encourage people to continue the discussion on online. We will be posting a recording of this on LinkedIn and on Twitter, and you can continue the debate there. It's a different forum, it's a different format, and it can draw its own problems. But I do appreciate and want to thank our panelists tonight, Mr. Professor Pflüger, Professor Pisarska, Mr. Harms, and most importantly, Professor Bindenagel, who was the inspiration behind organizing this event in terms of, he wrote a few pieces that I sort of put on my radar, and as it turns out, it's become a very timely debate given this recent escalations in the border between Ukraine and Russia. We're not going to solve those problems ourselves here tonight. I thank our audience for coming. I really appreciate your attendance, and I'd urge those of you who are not already members of United, please go to our website, united-europe.com or .eu, excuse me, and join us as a member and support us in organizing more of these events and more of these debates. We'd really appreciate it. So thank you, everybody, and good night.
Good night.